I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're unraveling one of literature's greatest mysteries with John Milnes Baker, author of The Case for Edward de Vere as the Real William Shakespeare. This provocative book challenges the long-held beliefs that Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, is the true author behind Shakespeare's legendary works. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. We ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his important book. The link is below this interview. John, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Nice to be here.
What sparked your curiosity into the true identity of William Shakespeare that you went upon this journey to unveil the truth?
It goes back to 1989. I happened to pick up I was reading a supplement to the New York Times literary section, and there was a letter to the editor saying that he had been at a dinner in London, and someone had mentioned the name Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, as a possible, most likely author of the book. And somebody wrote in, and he was writing in response to this, who said that the evidence was thin. And this guy said, it's not thin at all. And he mentioned two books. And I bought one of them. And the case where, well, no, what was it?
Well,
the mysterious William Shakespeare, the myth and the reality. It was Charlton Ogburn Jr. was the author, and I went and bought it, and I read it through, and I was intrigued, and I shared this with my brother, who was an older brother. They're always smarter than their younger siblings. And he had a degree from Columbia in English literature and a master's degree from English literature. And to top it all off, he married Diana Harbridge, whose father was Professor Harbridge at Columbia at the time, went on to become Cabot Professor of English Literature at Harvard. Lovely man. But anyway, and I told my brother, Alan, I said, Alan, this is wonderful. Look at this. I'd never run across it before. And I don't know, he turned the color of a fire engine and smoke came out of his ears and a hole appeared on the top of his Roman candle. I couldn't believe the reaction. And we're very, very compatible, loving brothers. And I was really dumbfounded by the response. And then I found out afterward, it's typical of what are called Stratfordians, people who believe that the man from Stratford unquestionably was the author of William Shakespeare. In fact, his name wasn't William Shakespeare, it was Will Shakespeare. And I won't go into that, but if anybody reads my book or goes online and sees anything, you can find out that there were 20 or 30 entries in all of the public records, and the name was spelled Shakespeare most of the time, S-H-A, all kinds of ways, but pronounced that way. And so then I read every other book on the subject. I joined the Shakespeare Oxford Society in 1990. And for 30 years, I read every book and followed along. I was a longtime member of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, which is an educational platform, if you will, program to inform people who are curious about the person we all think was the original author. And then when COVID hit, a very interesting thing happened. There were a lot of people who were left alone, but they could go online, and there wasn't any online in 1990. And more people signed on to a thing called Doubt About Will. And it's you sign up and you say you believe that it's a legitimate subject for exploration and discussion. They don't claim it's de Vere or anybody else. They just say it's an interesting subject. And John Goldsworthy said this was the most exciting whodunit that he'd ever encountered. And so then in the last 3 years, I gave a talk at our library in Kent Memorial Library, when I first came out with this book. And I did it because I have two very smart, well, I have a lot of smart grandchildren, but two of them particularly were here for Thanksgiving. And I took them to the House of Books, the bookstore, and they made a beeline for the children's section. And they said, "Oh, Poppy, you're an architect. Here's who was Frank Lloyd Wright." And I knew about the series because they both had about 2 feet of these wonderful little booklets. And I glanced through the one on Frank Lloyd Wright, and I loved Wright. I met him once, a few months before he died. It was wonderful. But anyway, I was so impressed by it. And they said, "Oh, Poppy, I know you like William Shakespeare. Here's William Shakespeare." And I went, "Oh, God, now we're in trouble." And it was filled with all of the made up, it was a junk book, really. And it not only did it perpetuate the myth, but it made up all kinds of things. Saying he went to school, he wasn't allowed to, and when he was 7, they weren't allowed to speak English, just Latin. And if they didn't speak Latin, they were spanked. I mean, this is the kind of junk in it. So it was Random House, who published it, one of their subsidiaries, invited on their website suggestions for other ideas. And they were wonderful. Who was Frank Lloyd Wright, but also who was George Washington, who was Amelia Earhart, who was Babe Ruth, who was all kinds of people. And I suggested that they come out with, it was a wonderful way of teaching their young readers that there's often another side to the story. Mm-hmm. And why didn't they publish who was Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford? No response. I tried once more, and I said that there were all kinds of people, Mark Twain, Sigmund Freud, Walt Whitman, 5 Supreme Court justices, on, who were, the phrase now seems to be anti-Stratfordian. And so again, no response. So I said, well, I can't write who was Edward de Vere, but I could write the case for Edward de Vere. So originally it was an elementary introduction to the subject for my young 10-year-old grandchildren. Mm-hmm. But by the time it was done, it morphed into an elementary introduction to the whole world of the Shakespeare authorship question, and not just for children, but for adults. And I gave a talk at the library, and it eventually went on YouTube, and it's literally been viewed thousands of times. And I've gotten all kinds of responses, and people email me. They find me because I'm just Google it, John Milnes Baker, and I've written other books on architecture. And well, you convinced me, and that's very satisfying. And one fellow on Amazon had said, "Oh, 1 star, thumbs down." And I was able to respond to him, and I thanked him because he proved my point that the contemptuous views that the Stratfordians have for anybody that would dare question this, their bardolatry, which is really started in the 19th century.
Exactly.
As you can see, I babble on the subject. So
let me ask you, what makes Edward de Vere, his life, his background, a plausible candidate for the true author of Shakespeare's work?
Well, for many, many years, all through even going back to the late 16th century, when Elizabeth was still alive, the first time the name William Shakespeare appeared in print was in 1593, and it wasn't a play. It was Venus and Adonis. It was a long narrative poem. And but then plays had been appearing before that without attribution. And somebody would say, well, who was it? Who wrote these things? And there was all kinds of speculation even then. And of course, when Queen Elizabeth died in 1603 and de Vere died the following year in 1604. And at that time, there was a cutoff of a lot of these nameless authors' plays that had been performed people knew that somebody wrote them, and there'd been speculation going on and on. But particularly in the 19th century, bardolatry, which is the Bard of Stratford-on-Avon, or the Bard of Avon, and it's astonishing. My brother was just representative of the approach that you cannot accept anything new. There's another new book that just came out last year, and a friend of mine got me to go to a book signing and talk by this woman, Elizabeth Winkler. And I'm very glad to give her book a plug. It was called, Was Shakespeare a Woman? And I said, oh God, this is going to be. Oh, and then I read the subtitle, and Other Heresies. And then there was a subtitle that said, How Doubting the Bard Became the Biggest Taboo in Literature. And you can't imagine this firestorm that started with these opposing views. And it's I'm as fascinated by the fact that people have a mindset, and something happens, they just cannot accept something that's contrary to what they've always believed, or they were told to believe, or they were indoctrinated with. And I don't care. People think, well, you're on a cause to convert it. No, if somebody wants to believe there's a man in the moon and he eats breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that's fine with me.
Yeah.
If they want to believe that the man from Stratford, who couldn't even write his own name, there are only 6 purported signatures by the man, and they're scrawled, and they probably weren't even written by him. They were probably written by a clerk. 3 of them were on his will. And it's a mystery to me. And I find it fascinating that people come up to me and they want to discuss it. And I said, have you ever read a book on the subject? Oh, yeah, I read Stephen Greenblatt. I've read, I said, no. Have you ever read anything about de Vere? And there are many of them. And I list the whole, in page 34 and 35 of my little book, are all, if you want to find out more and you have a kind of natural curiosity, here's where to begin. And that's the whole point of my book. It's not an extensive, in-depth case for Edward de Vere. I touch the high points, and if somebody's has the kind of mind that you want to know what all the fuss is about, this is where you begin.
Wonderful. Wonderful. The name of the book is The Case for Edward de Vere as the Real William Shakespeare. It's written by John Milnes Baker, and it is provocative, as he just described, because a lot of people are hesitant to say that Shakespeare was something other than Shakespeare. Some people even claim Shakespeare was multiple authors, but this is the
something to that.
What's that?
There's something to that.
Yeah.
De Vere, in the thing that gets me, how I've never heard anybody explain how all the references to ancient Greek writers, early Latin writers, and contemporary Renaissance writers in Italy and France, they were never translated into English, and yet the symbolism, the references throughout all the Shakespeare plays. Well, he's a genius. That literally is the answer. Or I don't care who wrote them. We still have the plays.
Well, of course, but it is curious to find out who was the actual author, which is
Yeah.
what you're endeavoring to do here, without a doubt. It's an interesting book. It'll spark some conversations. You'll love John's insights. John, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
I'm pleased to be with you. Thank you very much.
I appreciate your time. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.